Hello everyone, I'm Brian. Today I'm reacting to Satsang Q&A with Swami Tadatmananda, 4th of February 2024. So there's not much else to say, but let's go ahead and get started.
Here. Okay. That looks good. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahavidyan Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvisha vahai Shanti Shanti Shanti. That same problem. Okay, let me put this over here. That seems to work better. Okay, welcome. There you are. Welcome to all of you for assembled here for our weekly satsang, and also welcome to the many students all over the world. It's kind of fun to receive these questions from our online students. And what we'll do today, like last week, is we'll take both. We'll take some questions from the online students and some questions from our local New Jersey students here. So let us begin. This is from Narayanam. This is your question? Good. So it is from one of our local students. And Narayanan asks, Scripture says Brahma Satyam Jagan Mithya. Actually, it's Shankaracharya's statement, not found in any scripture. And it says Brahma Satyam. Brahman is what is real, the underlying reality, because of which everything exists. And Jagan Mithya, Jagat, the world, is Mithya. And the question he goes on to ask is, when you say Brahma Satyam, Jagat Mithya, I thought this was non-dual Vedanta. What happens to Advaita when you have one Brahman, which happens to be Satyam, and you have one world that happens to be Mithya? That doesn't look non-dual. And there's a very easy answer for that question. Do I have one pot and one clay? There are two things. This is two things? This is
Interesting. So it's basically the shape and the material. It's not. So one is the fabric of what causes it to exist, the clay, and the other is the appearance, which is the what did I say? Form and function, the function of it, the function of the shape, the pot.
one thing. It's only one thing, right? It's one thing from two perspectives. From the perspective of form, we call it pot. From the perspective of essence or content, we call it clay. One thing, two perspectives. One is a fundamental perspective, this is clay. And the other is a more general perspective when we call this pot, reference to its form. One thing, two perspectives. From an absolute perspective and from a relative perspective. Absolutely speaking, there's nothing here but clay. Relatively speaking, I'm holding a pot. But there's only one thing. Do you want to follow up on that?
That's actually really good.
So let's start using this microphone.
I think my question really is the second part of that email I sent to you. When it refers to Jagat, you call it Mithya. When it comes to Jiva, you say it's the same.
Mm-hmm.
So the root of this question is my understanding of Brahman as existent. My Brahman as existent.
Sorry.
Oh,
I'm smiling because this new system has just all kinds of problems. Anyway, continue, please.
so I think the root of that question is my understanding of Brahman as existence and consciousness.
Mhm.
So Jagat also.
What exactly is your question
So
now?
Jagat is existence, also existent. Jiva is also
Existent,
Exist.
not existence.
But what is the difference between the existing of the Jagat and the existence of Jiva?
So what is the difference between the existence of Brahman and the existence? What is the difference between the existence of Jagat and the existence of Jiva? Same. Yeah.
Jagat is mithya, whereas Jiva is the same as Brahma, the second.
No, Jiva.
Jiva Brahmaiva.
Okay. Okay.
That was my
There's
part.
something wrong with that microphone. Okay. So the second part of Shankara's statement is Jivo Brahmaiva na param. Jiva in essence is nothing but Brahman. In fact, you could say, Shankara didn't say it, but you could say Jagat is Brahmaiva. Same. So it's like if you have one pot or 1,000 pots, they're all clay. If you have one jiva or an entire universe of jivas, it's all one Brahman. It's no difference. It's just the same two perspectives. A perspective of absolute reality, level of clay, and a perspective of relative reality, the reality of the form, pot. Does that work for you? Okay. All right.
I didn't quite understand his question, but it almost seemed like if there were multiple clay pots, would they be separate and not one? And but apparently, I guess the second answer, he answered the question. But I was thinking along the lines of, just because there's a clay pot here, 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 and here, the underlying realities are all made out of clay, even though there's many pots. It's still the underlying reality. So he talks about the different perspectives, as in the perspective of clay and the perspective of many pots or pots. It's kind of like us, where we are all separate from Brahman, even though the underlying reality is we're all Brahman.
I thought Narayana looked familiar here in our list of questions. All right. Next question. Doubt. This is interesting. This comes from Manju, who lives in Bengal. And her question is with regard to some of Shankara's commentaries, especially some of his commentaries on Brahma Sutras and this big text, Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. She notices some statements that are highly suspect, difficult statements, where Shankara says, in his commentary on Brihadaranyaka, and she gives the passage, and where Shankara says that women should only do housework, and they should not be allowed to study the Vedas. He says, yes, I don't deny it. And then she goes on to a more troubling expression in his commentaries on the Brahma Sutras, where he talks about Shudras not being entitled to study the Vedas. And she goes on to say that those statements are actually contrary to most of Shankara's teachings, when he goes on talking about how there is only one consciousness, and these are all names and forms, and isn't this contradictory? Absolutely contradictory. Mm-hmm. Whenever you look at a passage of commentary, you have to look at it in the context of the commentary. So, in other words, when Shankara is talking about women in this Brihadaranyaka passage, or when he's talking about Shudras, the low caste, in the Brahma Sutra commentary, there's a reason, a very specific reason he's talking about that. There's a context. And definitely when we take these statements, as she did, out of context, they look terrible. If you put them in context, they're still not great. So, and the reason for these statements at all is Shankara lived in India 800 years ago. How different was India? How different was India 80 years ago? 20 years ago, right? That the country, every country undergoes so much change. So Shankara's statements, which I don't accept them as being valid and meaningful today, but they were valid and meaningful 800 years ago. So he spoke according to his society. In his society, these statements made sense. At his time and place, these statements made sense, especially when you consider who Shankara was and the nature of the students he was addressing. So when you get the whole context, these statements are understandable. I didn't say correct. I said understandable. So anyway, I think the larger issue here has to do with when we extract statements out of context, then we lose so much. And a favorite example of that is, let me just escape my mind. Hold on.
Okay, while I was thinking about that, I do want to say something about this, honestly. And this is something that I have thought of relatively recently as well. I guess relatively recently is fair enough to say. Within the 10 years, I suppose. Perhaps within 5 years. But we have to understand things to understand why things are. That almost doesn't make sense. But we have to understand why. We have to understand what happened in the past, depending on what you're trying to understand. Are you trying to understand why society is the way it is today? You have to go back to the past and understand why, what happened in the past, what led us to where we are at today, and why things are the way they are today. So there's this idea of the patriarchy. I know Acharya Prashant talked about it. It's been a little bit since I watched that video. But the reason why we have a patriarchy is because males have been the strongest. There's no one can deny that. Now there are either be exceptional females, of course, that can beat some males, but generally speaking, males are stronger than females, so they have taken the lead. Also, males are more stupid too, or risk takers. So you end up seeing a lot more males dying by trying what we consider today stupid stuff, but it's a way of discovery. Now, you don't take that as fact from me, but obviously we have to take risk in order to discover certain things, especially in the past. The past was, there's no, you have to wash your hands before you eat your food, especially if you touch bad stuff. Not back then. You touch bad stuff, it's like, oh, food, there goes that dude's life. But, men, generally speaking, have been more outgoing. So that's the reason why you have a lot more men, explorers, and men doing this and that. But by doing this and that, a lot of more men have died as well. So there's not, how do I say, there is not a reward without risk. Yeah, so basically, whenever you try to discover something, when you try to do something, there's generally speaking going to be a risk involved, especially in the past. Men have led because, one, they're stronger, two, they're more adventurous, three, they they run the risk of losing their lives. But that's the price to pay. So again, to kind of explain the patriarchy type thing, is, well, that's one reason why it's men have always led in the world, and men have had paid the price. And I'll say this too. I remember watching some red pill videos, and I remember women always saying, "Well, we have not been given the chance. We were never given this. We're never given the opportunity. We're never given the whatever. It's, you always hear the phrase given, given, given. It's like, well, give us a chance. Give us the opportunity. Give us the ability. And this is the thing that I noticed when I was listening. It took me a little bit to hear that, and I started thinking about that, and it's like, well, men were never given anything really. Most men were taking. So again, going out in an adventure, they run the risk of losing their lives, and many have. But in order to be given, well, in order to get something, if it's not given to you, you have to take it. So I just want to point that out, as in terms of understanding.
Ah, ekam sat vipra bahudha varanti. This is a little snippet, comes from Rig Veda, and people love to quote it out of context. And let me show you why context is so important. Most of you have heard this. Ekam sat. Truth is one. Vipraha, the wise ones, bahudha, in many ways, varanti, spoke about that one truth. The problem with that interpretation is that is one small part of a whole hymn. Wouldn't it be interesting to look at what precedes that line and what follows that line? What precedes that line is he's talking about praising Indra, Vishnu, Surya, Agni, and that continues afterwards, talking about all these various deities. The context in the hymn is worship of all these different deities. Knowing that the context in the hymn is worship of all these deities, go back to that statement now. Ekam Sat. Not truth is one. God is one. And Vipraha, wise people, Bahudha, in many ways, Varanti, they describe that one God in many ways. That makes so much sense. But notice when you take it out of context, instead of saying there is one God that Hindus worship in many ways, which is according to the context, there is one truth. And the wise describe that one truth in many ways, and that's why there are so many different spiritual paths. Except that's not what the Veda says. Sounds good. And that's perhaps why that misinterpretation stuck, and that is, it sounds good that there is one truth and you can follow one of many paths to reach that truth. Nothing wrong with that, except that's not what the Veda says. Okay, enough said. Let's take another question here.
And go back to my last comment too. Again, it's not to say there aren't great women that have done things in the past, but I'm just noticing a lot of women in modern day, especially in the West, who always play the victim card, but they don't understand the context as to why things are the way they are. And this is one of my beliefs too. If you understand how things are and why things are, I think your life will become easier. And this is goes back to my point of understanding. Now, I'm not going to say it's going to make your how do I say this? It's not going to correct if there's any wrongs to it, but at least if you understand it, you know what you can and cannot do because you understand it. You understand there's an injustice in the world, but you don't know what the solution is. At least you shouldn't be necessarily frustrated with it because you understand it. But a better understanding would be knowing what the solution could be and working towards it.
If this is from Vikas,
That's a long one.
I don't know where he lives. Vikas has several questions. One question is, if the observer is me, and observer means sakshi, means consciousness. If I am that consciousness, and that consciousness is part of a super consciousness. Consciousness is part of a super consciousness. Does that term super consciousness, first of all, it's English, so you wouldn't expect to find an English expression in a scripture, but you won't find the term super consciousness in Sanskrit either. This is a common modern approach. Yeah, there's much of what is taught in the name of Advaita Vedanta is very loosely connected to the traditional teachings. And for that reason, a lot of errors, small and big, comes in. I could consider this a fairly small error. The error is really not so much the term super consciousness. The error is when he said part. Consciousness. Your consciousness is not a part. Jivatma, to you, and now we'll use the proper Sanskrit terms. Jivatma, your consciousness, is not a part of Paramatma, the so-called supreme or super consciousness. There is no part and whole relationship. Paramatma is the absolute reality. It has parts. How many parts? What color are they? What shape are they? We're talking about reality here. We're not talking about things that have parts and dimensions. So what is counterintuitive is that you think your consciousness is yours and is therefore separate or independent of that Paramatma, that all-pervasive consciousness, and that's simply wrong. Your consciousness is identical to Paramatma. I'll say that again. The consciousness present in your experience right now is Paramatma. And if you ask, how can that be so? That's the right question. That's our starting point in Advaita Vedanta, to find out what is going on here, really. The brief, we won't get into it too much further, briefly put, one consciousness is reflected or manifest in countless minds. It's your mind that gives you the sense of individuality, not consciousness. So we've joked about this, I think, in our Vedanta class, to say my consciousness is completely incorrect. You don't possess your own independent consciousness. There is but one consciousness. Then what is the problem? The problem is failure to understand this correctly. The problem is focused on when you take yourself as being an individual conscious being, separate and independent of Paramatma, this error in thinking or confusion is the root problem that we address here in Advaita Vedanta.
All right, before he gets to the next one, actually, let's see what it says.
Okay, we'll take... There's one question here. I want to apologize for Daniel. Daniel lives in Philippines. And Daniel has a wonderful question here, but it goes on for about 4 pages.
Oh.
So my request is for questions to be a little bit more brief.
Okay. Before he gets to that one, as a matter of fact, I might pause it right here, actually. So one thing that kind of clicked, even though I've said it before in videos prior, is that about memory. And I remember thinking that consciousness and your memories and all that are all going to be in this consciousness. But, and I've said a few times that everything in this body, memories and whatever else you've done in this body, will stay in this body. It doesn't go with your consciousness, because the statement that consciousness is unaffected by your emotions, your thoughts, your memories, anything the physical body or the physical world has done. Consciousness is pure as it is and nothing else. So no matter what you have ever done in this world, it will never go with your consciousness. um, it will all die with the body. The memories, the pain, suffering, joys, exhalations. I don't know if that's even a word. um, Memories, whatever else, whatever you took from this world, those that are intangible, like your memories, will return to this world. Kind of like the food that you've eaten as well too, the water that you've drank. So yes, whatever came from this world will stay in this world, and your consciousness didn't come from this world. So I guess it's a pretty good way of looking or trying to explain to people, because I remember having this confusion earlier on. I was thinking your memories and all that will travel because of reincarnation, which is kind of weird to say because I guess it's another question. Is that again, along with the AI, I've seen some people answer that question, but it's still not quite. I guess we need a back and forth on that one because of what it is. Anyways, so people who reincarnate and remember their past, how is that possible when your memories don't come with you? Because memories doesn't get uploaded to the cloud. The cloud being Brahman, let's just say that. So your memories die with your body, I assume, and also because your consciousness doesn't retain emotions or memories or anything in this world, I assume. Let me know if I'm wrong on that one. But as far as my understanding, I do believe to be correct on that. That your consciousness is only ever consciousness and nothing else. So it doesn't have any emotions. It will not retain emotions. It will not learn emotions. It will not know memories or retain memories or anything like that. So it kind of goes karma out the window a little bit. But as far as I understand, because again, there can't the our decisions in this life. How do I say? Are made by this body, not from any other body, because we only ever have this body, and we'll only ever have this body, and there's only ever one consciousness, which is in all bodies. So all your memories and everything stays with this body. Now, how it gets transferred to a new body, how does your memories transfer to a new body? Now, maybe that's a level of Advaita Vedanta I've not seen yet. I've kind of touched up on some explanation of that, especially with Buddhism, where the essence of everything that you've accumulated that's not the physical will transfer to the next body. Your karma, etc., your memories and all that. But in terms of Advaita Vedanta, your memories and all that doesn't get transferred because, well, it's all there is consciousness. At least I believe. Again, I've not heard of something else being transferred from one body to the next besides, I wouldn't say even consciousness is being transferred, but because it's always there. So anyways, I hope you understand my question. And this is the end of part 1 of this video. If you like my content, please consider subscribing, thumbs up, the sound down below. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next vid.